You think you know someone, right? You build a life, a perfect, glittering existence with them. But what if that sparkle is just reflecting a vast, terrifying darkness? What if the person you share your bed with, the father of your unborn child, is a monster hiding in plain sight? This isn't just a story. It's a descent into a reality so twisted it will make you question everything. The unthinkable has happened. A picture-perfect marriage to a beloved billionaire, a man hailed as the Midas King of Nova City, was nothing but a meticulously crafted illusion, masking a web of deceit so vast it threatened to swallow everyone whole. And at the center of it all, Elara Vance, radiant, pregnant, and about to have her world utterly shattered. Imagine living a fairy tale, every dream catered for by the charming, powerful Julian Thorne. He's a titan of industry, a philanthropist whose generosity seemingly knows no bounds. Sounds perfect, doesn't it? But hold on. In the span of a single horrifying discovery, Elara's world wouldn't just crack, it would explode. And in the next few minutes, you'll learn how one hidden cipher key, a tiny piece of tech, became her only weapon in a desperate battle for truth, for survival, a secret Julian Thorne would undoubtedly kill to protect. And trust me, the secrets on that key? They're bigger, darker, and more shocking than you can possibly imagine. Julian isn't just a cheat. His philanthropy, his carefully polished charm, conceals a darkness that has its tendrils wrapped around the very core of the city. A truth that will make your skin crawl. From the moment Elara stumbles on the first thread of this chilling reality, her life and the life of her unborn child are in immediate mortal danger. You absolutely cannot miss how this incredible story of betrayal and revenge begins, because the twists and turns are unbelievable, and the contents of that cipher key. Everyone will be talking about it. What devastating secret did Elara uncover in the sanctity of her own bedroom? And how on earth could a single, almost insignificant encrypted drive hold the power to dismantle an empire seemingly built on gold, goodwill, and an untouchable legacy? The answer will shock you. This isn't just about a rich man's secrets. It's about the terrifying ease with which evil can wear a beautiful mask. Elara felt it, that faint, unplaceable unease, like a cold draft in a warm room, even amidst the perfection of her life. Julian, for all his exceptional charm, his way of making her feel like the only woman in the world, was also subtly controlling, his affection sometimes feeling like a velvet glove on an iron fist. She recalled a moment, a fleeting, chilling comment he'd made during a lavish charity dinner, something about necessary sacrifices for a true legacy. A comment she'd quickly dismissed, attributing it to the immense pressures he was under. But the words, like a drop of poison, had planted a tiny, insidious seed of doubt, a seed that was about to bloom into a terrifying forest. What if the Midas touch was actually a death grip? Stay tuned, because you're about to find out. This is a story you'll want to share, to discuss, to dissect. So hit that like button if you're already hooked, and tell me in the comments, what do you think is the darkest secret a billionaire could hide? Elara, basking in the glow of her upcoming baby shower, tried to dismiss that fleeting shadow of unease about Julian's increasingly late nights and hushed, urgent phone calls. She told herself it was just the immense pressure of his vast empire, the burden of being Julian Thorne. So she focused on what she believed was the good they did together. Their charitable foundation, the Thorne Legacy Foundation, a celebrated beacon of hope in the sprawling metropolis of Nova City. Yet, even there, in the polished marble halls of benevolence, whispers of Julian's legendary ruthlessness, his take-no-prisoners approach to business, sometimes slipped through the cracks, chilling her despite the warmth of their public life. But paradise, as Elara was beginning to learn, always had a price. And she was starting to sense, with a dawning, sickening dread, the subtle, cold shifts of the gilded cage Julian had so lovingly, so meticulously built around her. Behind every great fortune lies a great crime, they say. Elara Vance, however, was about to discover the crime wasn't buried deep in Julian Thorne's past. No, it was their glittering, insidious, and very active present. Her own history, rooted in the unassuming honesty and wide-open spaces of Willow Creek, Montana, felt like a lifetime, another universe, away from the dazzling, often deceptive, high-stakes society of Nova City. The genuine warmth she carried within her, an almost childlike sincerity that charmed nearly everyone she met, was a stark, sometimes uncomfortable, contrast to the city's calculated polish and veiled intentions. This very authenticity, this quiet refusal to play the intricate games of the elite, was perhaps what had first drawn the enigmatic, powerful Julian Thorne to her. Or so she'd allowed herself to believe in those intoxicating whirlwind early days of their courtship. Oh, how she had loved him. Loved him with a depth and purity that saw past the formidable Midas King persona, past the fawning headlines and the adoring crowds, to the man she desperately believed she knew, the man she thought she could save. She'd genuinely, passionately, seen herself as the compassionate force in his incredibly public life, the steadying hand on the arm of the philanthropic giant, the gentle heart tempering his fierce, almost terrifying ambition. It was a role she cherished, a fundamental belief she clung to with a white-knuckled grip, even as insidious, undeniable shadows began to creep into the periphery of their sun-drenched, picture-perfect life. She vividly remembered telling her mother, her voice filled with a conviction she now questioned, during a rare, brief visit back to the quiet sanity of Willow Creek. "He's a good man, Mom, truly. Underneath all that power, all that pressure. He just needs someone to remind him of the simple things, of what really matters." How painfully hollow, how tragically naive those words would soon sound, even to her own ears. Julian Thorne. The name itself was a global headline, a synonym for unimaginable success, for a Midas touch that turned industries and fortunes to gold. Hailing from an old-money, blue-blooded Beacon Hill family in Boston, he hadn't merely inherited vast wealth, he'd magnified it exponentially, his ambition a relentless, insatiable engine driving him to the absolute zenith of global finance and industry. The Thorne Legacy Foundation, his most celebrated and visible creation, was meticulously designed to be the glittering jewel in his philanthropic crown, a shining testament to his supposed benevolence, and a carefully crafted example for other titans of industry to follow. It sponsored countless scholarships for underprivileged youth, funded state-of-the-art hospitals in underserved communities around the world, and hosted breathtakingly opulent galas that were the undisputed envy of the international social calendar. Star-studded events where millions were raised, very publicly, for a plethora of noble causes, all under the benevolent, smiling gaze of its charismatic founder. A philanthropic facade so brilliantly constructed, so dazzlingly maintained with Julian's signature charm, his effortless eloquence, and his uncanny ability to make every donor feel like the most important person in the room, that few, if any, dared to question what or who truly propped it up. After all, who would dare to look for rot in such a perfect golden apple? But Elara, living within that golden glow, nestled at the very heart of this sprawling empire, had started to see the tarnish, the almost imperceptible, hairline cracks in the otherwise flawless, diamond-hard veneer. The inconsistencies were small at first, easily dismissed as the quirks of a complex man, or the inevitable pressures of his immense responsibilities. A grand philanthropic gesture, publicly lauded and splashed across magazine covers, that privately, behind closed doors, felt more like a meticulously staged, emotionally hollow performance for the cameras than a genuine act of heartfelt giving. She'd catch a flicker, a momentary lapse, a certain reptilian coldness in his eyes when discussing a business rival's sudden, inexplicable misfortune, a fleeting hint of brutal ruthlessness, quickly, almost instantly, masked by that disarming, public smile that could and often did melt glaciers and open checkbooks. Then came the more tangible shifts, the subtle, insidious withdrawals that spoke volumes louder than any shouted argument. His private calls, once shared, intimate murmurs in the quiet sanctity of their shared space, became hushed, urgent, coded whispers conducted behind the suddenly imposing, firmly closed doors of his private study. Doors that, she couldn't help but notice with a growing chill, seemed to be closing on her, shutting her out more and more frequently. He grew distant, an almost imperceptible drift at first, then a chasm, wide and cold, that yawned between them, filled with unspoken words and a silence that screamed. Their opulent Nova City mansion, a sprawling testament to his global success, perched like a king's fortress on the hills overlooking the glittering, indifferent city, began to feel less like a cherished home and more like a beautiful, exquisitely appointed, echoing cage. Its vast, museum-like rooms, lined with priceless art and staffed by an army of discreet, almost invisible personnel, offered every conceivable luxury, every material comfort, but no solace, no genuine warmth. In its very grandeur, amidst the constant whisper of expensive silk and the distant clink of crystal, Elara felt an acute, gnawing sense of isolation. A loneliness so profound it ached in her bones, a silent scream trapped in her throat. One cool evening, the heavy, signature scent of Julian's expensive cologne, mingling with the distant, muted hum of Nova City's relentless energy filtering through the open terrace doors, she'd been passing his study, a forgotten book in her hand, merely seeking a quiet corner to read, to escape the oppressive perfection of their life. The door, usually so firmly, almost defiantly, shut during these increasingly frequent late-night business sessions, was uncharacteristically, carelessly, slightly ajar. A sliver of warm amber light, a sliver of hushed sound, beckoned. And she heard it. Not the entire conversation, of course, just fragments, jagged, chilling pieces of a puzzle she instinctively knew, with a sickening lurch in her stomach, she didn't want to solve. Julian's voice, usually so smooth and persuasive, the mellifluous voice that could charm nations and command boardrooms with effortless ease, was hard, clipped, utterly stripped of all its usual warmth and seductive cadence. Contain the situation, absolutely no loose ends, the untraceable accounts are paramount, the exposure, Elara, would be catastrophic. Her stomach clenched violently, a knot of pure ice forming in her chest, stealing her breath, making her sway. Untraceable accounts? Containing what unimaginable situation? Catastrophic exposure of what dark secret? It sounded chilling, utterly dangerous. She'd confronted him later that night, when he finally emerged from his den looking tired but strangely, almost unnervingly triumphant. Her voice barely a shaky whisper, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped, frantic bird. "Julian, what was that about? Those untraceable accounts?" He turned then, his handsome expression momentarily unreadable. A flicker of something cold and dark in the depths of his eyes before that familiar, disarming, oh-so-reassuring smile slid effortlessly back into place. He'd laughed it off, a low, dismissive chuckle, pulling her into a cool, almost perfunctory embrace. "Darling Elara," he'd murmured against her hair, "always worrying that pretty little head of yours. Just a complex deal, my love, a minor hiccup with some difficult overseas partners. Absolutely nothing for you to concern yourself with." Then, as if to punctuate his dismissal, a lavish, obscenely expensive gift had appeared on her vanity the very next day. A stunning diamond necklace, its flawless stones like frozen, accusing tears. It felt less like a token of misguided affection and more like a beautiful, silencing, gilded muzzle. The gesture, so clearly meant to soothe, to distract, to buy her silence, only managed to deepen the pervasive, suffocating disquiet. The tiny seed of suspicion, once planted by his careless, overheard words and so artfully concealed by his practiced charm, had now irrevocably, frighteningly, taken root. It was a few weeks later, while meticulously reviewing some documents for an upcoming Thorne Legacy Foundation charity auction, a task she usually undertook with genuine pride and a deep sense of dedication, her small way of contributing meaningfully to his world, of proving her worth beyond just being Mrs. Julian Thorne, that she found it. She was cross-referencing donor lists with pledged auction items, her brow furrowed in concentration, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten beside her, when her gaze snagged on an unfamiliar, almost alien entry in one of Julian's private ledgers. This wasn't one of the glossy, publicly available annual reports. It was a heavy, imposing book bound in dark, expensive Italian leather, a volume he usually kept locked away, she knew, in his personal, impenetrable safe. How it had been left out on his otherwise immaculate desk she didn't know. Perhaps it was a rare, uncharacteristic oversight in his usually flawless attention to detail. Tucked away discreetly beside a series of large, disturbingly anonymous financial transactions, each one a staggering, almost incomprehensible sum, was a small, unfamiliar sigil, intricately, almost invisibly, etched in the margin of the thick, cream-colored paper. It was a coiled serpent, its tail disappearing ominously into its own mouth, the Ouroboros, the serpent coil. It meant nothing to her immediately, not in any concrete sense, yet it felt profoundly, disturbingly significant, alien, a dark, primitive mark on the otherwise pristine, carefully audited pages of their supposed public benevolence. What was this sinister, ancient symbol? And why, dear God, why was it linked so explicitly to these shadowy figures, these untraceable corporate entities, and these vast, unimaginable sums of money flowing like a dark river through the Foundation's most confidential, most guarded records? The questions spun in her mind, a dizzying, nauseating vortex, fueling the gnawing, inescapable sense that her life, for all its outward, glittering perfection and enviable privilege, was indeed nothing more than a gilded cage, and the bars, once invisible, were now growing thicker, colder, more suffocating by the day. Her pregnancy, the miracle they had both ostensibly yearned for, the child that was supposed to cement their love, their legacy, their future, was supposed to be the balm, the ultimate, unbreakable bond that drew them closer than ever before. Instead, with a cruel, biting irony that twisted like a knife in her gut, it seemed to be an inadvertent catalyst, pushing Julian further and further into his shadowy, incomprehensible dealings, making him more fiercely, almost obsessively, protective of his myriad secrets, more conspicuously, painfully, absent from her life, from their home, from their shared future. He was consumed, it seemed, by endless, suddenly unscheduled board meetings that ran impossibly late into the night, by sudden, unexplained overseas expansions that required him to leave at a moment's notice, with little more than a cursory, distracted kiss goodbye and a vague promise to call. And then, of course, there were the ever-present, increasingly ugly rumors of his indiscretions, sordid liaisons with a seemingly endless parade of interchangeable women whose names and faces blurred into a generic, forgettable tableau of Nova City's ambitious, predatory beauties. Elara had tried, with all her might, with every ounce of her rapidly dwindling strength, to ignore them, to build an impenetrable wall of denial around her aching heart, desperately dismissing them as malicious tabloid fodder, the inevitable, sordid, and ultimately meaningless byproduct of Julian's immense fame, his fortune, his irresistible charisma. She'd prayed, fervently nightly, that they were just that. Baseless, cruel whispers designed to wound, to destabilize, to destroy. After all, he was Julian Thorne, her husband, the loving father of her unborn child. Could he truly be capable of such casual, devastating cruelty, such profound, soul-shattering betrayal? The doubt, once a whisper, was now a constant, unwelcome companion, a cold, dark shadow clinging to her every waking moment, poisoning her thoughts, her dreams. The unease festered, a slow, insidious poison seeping into the very foundations of her meticulously constructed world. A world she now suspected, with a certainty that terrified her, was built on a treacherous, unstable bedrock of lies. One crisp, deceptively beautiful autumn morning, returning unexpectedly, blessedly, early from that brief charity planning trip to Port Sterling. A quick, almost impulsive 2-day affair she'd hoped, naively, would clear her head and soothe her increasingly frayed nerves. Elara walked slowly, hesitantly, towards their master bedroom, a profound sense of dread coiling in her stomach, tight and cold and horribly, eerily reminiscent of the serpent sigil she'd glimpsed in that locked ledger and couldn't, no matter how hard she tried, for the life of her, forget. The heavy, ornate oak door, usually closed and silent, a barrier between their private world and the rest of the mansion, was slightly, almost invitingly, ajar. The unease festered, a slow poison seeping into the foundations of her world, a world she now suspected was built on a bedrock of lies. One crisp autumn morning, returning unexpectedly early from a charity planning trip to Port Sterling, a quick, almost impulsive 2-day affair she'd hoped would clear her head and soothe her fraying nerves. Elara walked towards their bedroom, a sense of dread coiling in her stomach, tight and cold, eerily reminiscent of the serpent sigil she'd glimpsed in that locked ledger and couldn't, for the life of her, forget. The heavy oak door, usually closed and silent, was slightly ajar. The sight that met Elara's eyes wasn't just a betrayal. It was a declaration of war on everything she held sacred. A brutal, visceral desecration of their life together. It was a scene of such casual, brazen contempt, such utter disregard for her, for their marriage, for the child she carried, that it literally stole the air from her lungs, leaving her gasping, drowning. There, on the opulent burgundy silk sheets she had chosen with such care only a year ago, sheets that had cradled their shared dreams and whispered intimacies, was Julian, her Julian, the man she loved. Entangled, like some sheep tableau from a sordid novel, with a striking, raven-haired woman whose face, when it turned towards the doorway, was a mask of pure, unadulterated, smug triumph. Isabelle Izzy Monet. The name, Elara would later learn, would sear itself into her memory with the branding iron of agonizing pain, but in that hideous frozen moment, she was just a faceless, nameless embodiment of a devastating, world-ending truth. Izzy's dark, feline eyes, cold and knowing, flicked towards Elara standing frozen in the doorway, and a small, almost imperceptible, yet infinitely cruel smirk played on her perfectly painted lips. She looked utterly, damnably comfortable. As if this wasn't her first time in Elara's bed, in Elara's life, in Elara's stolen future. The shock was visceral, a physical blow that buckled Elara's knees, threatening to send her crashing to the plush, indifferent carpet. Her carefully constructed world, the one built on pillars of love, unwavering trust, and the sacred promise of forever, didn't just crack. It imploded, shattering into a million glittering, razor-sharp fragments that rained down around her, each one a tiny, piercing agony. Anguish, raw, primal, and untamed, ripped through her, a silent scream tearing from her soul, followed by a wave of pure, icy fury that paradoxically, terrifyingly, calmed the violent tremor in her hands, steadying her resolve. This wasn't just about infidelity, some tawdry, predictable affair indulged in by a bored billionaire. No. This was about the profound, utter demolition of her entire reality. The sickening, gut-wrenching realization that the man she loved with all her heart, the life she lived with such naive joy, was an elaborate, cruel, and masterfully executed charade. Julian, startled by some infinitesimal sound, perhaps the sharp, painful hitch in Elara's breath, or the sudden, oppressive silence that fell like a shroud over the room, jolted fully awake. His usually impeccable, impenetrable composure, the one that never faltered under the relentless scrutiny of global markets or the probing questions of tenacious journalists, momentarily, tellingly, cracked. Panic, stark, undisguised, and ugly, flashed in his eyes. A brief, damning glimpse of the monster beneath the mask, before the well-practiced facade of suave control slammed back down. He started to speak, to stammer some undoubtedly smooth, practiced excuse, his mind already racing, calculating. But Elara, to her own surprise, didn't wait to hear it. She didn't want to hear another lie. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out, not then. Not a single tear escaped. Instead, a chilling, preternatural calm descended upon her, an almost out-of-body clarity born of absolute, soul-crushing devastation. In that single, crystallizing instant, the loving, trusting, hopeful Elara Vance died a silent, unmourned death. And someone new, someone harder, colder, forged in the unbearable crucible of unimaginable betrayal, began to emerge from the ashes. She simply turned, her movements surprisingly fluid and eerily deliberate, and walked away from the wreckage of her life. Not fleeing in wild hysterics, not stumbling blindly in overwhelming grief, but with a terrifying, new, and unshakable resolve solidifying in her spine, turning her bones to ice, her heart to stone. Every step was measured, each breath controlled, precise. The war had been declared not by her but against her. And she, unknowingly, until this very moment, had just been handed her most potent, most unexpected weapons. That very same day, within hours of the cataclysmic discovery, Elara Vance vanished from Nova City. No tearful, dramatic goodbyes, no screaming confrontations that would alert the staff, no drawn-out, messy battles over assets or reputations that would feed the gossip columns for months. Just gone. One moment she was Mrs. Julian Thorne, the radiant, beloved, and very pregnant wife of Nova City's philanthropic Midas King, her image gracing magazine covers and society pages, and the next, she was an enigma, a whisper, a ghost. Her disappearance was clean, swift, precise, leaving behind a void that echoed with unspoken questions, with the deafening silence of truths too terrible to contemplate. But this was no spur-of-the-moment escape fueled by raw heartbreak and blind panic. Oh, no. The carefully crafted narrative that Julian and his high-powered PR team would later spin, of a distraught, hormonal wife overcome by emotion and confusion, couldn't have been further from the horrifying truth. For months, ever since that first chillingly overheard phone call and the disquieting discovery of the serpent coil sigil in Julian's private ledger, a small, hidden part of Elara, the pragmatic, resourceful part she'd inherited from her resilient Montana forebears, had been quietly, methodically preparing for an unknown, unthinkable eventuality. Suspecting, with a cold certainty that defied denial, far more than just simple infidelity, sensing a profound darkness in Julian that went far beyond mere marital transgressions, she had begun to weave a silent, desperate contingency plan, a secret strategy for survival in a world she no longer recognized, against an enemy she had once loved. Before she walked out of the opulent Thorne mansion, out of the gilded cage that had become her prison, out of the life that had been revealed as a monstrous lie, she moved with the quiet, focused purpose of a soldier preparing for battle. Her hands, surprisingly, didn't shake as she went to her private dressing room, to the antique, intricately carved rosewood music box that had been her late grandmother's most cherished possession. It always played a gentle, slightly melancholic tune from her childhood in Willow Creek, a melody of simpler, more honest times. Inside, beneath a cleverly concealed false bottom her grandmother had shown her as a giggling child, a precious secret shared between them, a legacy of female ingenuity, lay the Cipher Key. Not a traditional, ornate key of brass or silver, but a sleek, modern, encrypted USB drive, no bigger than her thumb, its casing a cool, unassuming black. This was her real insurance. This, she knew with a chilling certainty, was the weapon. She palmed it, the cool metal a small, hard, reassuring reality in a world that had dissolved into nightmarish chaos. As a final, cryptic, and deeply personal gesture, a silent message for anyone who might truly look beyond the headlines, for anyone who might understand the subtle, poignant language of lost innocence and quiet defiance. She left a single, perfectly pressed wildflower from the sun-drenched fields near her childhood home in Willow Creek, on Julian's side of the vast, empty bed, resting starkly, accusingly, against the pristine, unforgiving white of his 1,000-thread-count pillow, a vibrant, defiant splash of Montana purple against the cold, sterile landscape of their ruined marriage. Julian, when he finally, belatedly, registered her complete and utter absence hours later, after Isabelle Monet, sated and smug, had leisurely dressed and departed with another knowing, contemptuous glance towards the empty space where Elara should have been, was initially shocked, then profoundly irritated. His immediate, telling reaction wasn't grief or even concern, but a cold, swift, almost reptilian calculation of potential damage control. He found the wildflower, of course. It was a delicate, 5-petaled bloom he didn't recognize, a fragile symbol of a world he couldn't comprehend, a jarring, discordant note in his meticulously orchestrated, ruthlessly controlled universe. He brushed it aside with an impatient flick of his fingers, dismissing it as just another piece of Elara's supposed emotional fragility, her predictable sentimentality. He underestimated her. Profoundly, fatally. He had no idea, not even the slightest inkling, that the vanished wife, the quiet, gentle woman he thought he could so easily control, and if necessary discard, had just armed herself with the irrefutable devastating means to destroy his entire, glittering, corrupt, and ultimately hollow empire. The wildflower wasn't just a flower, it was a clue, a silent promise of a reckoning he couldn't yet possibly comprehend. Its true, devastating meaning, its potent symbolism of resilience and untamed truth, would only become terrifyingly clear much, much later, when the seemingly impregnable walls of his golden kingdom began to tremble, and then, spectacularly, to crumble into dust. Days later, with Elara still officially missing and the voracious, insatiable Nova City press beginning to sniff around the carefully managed edges of a scandal far juicier, far more explosive than mere marital strife, a stoic, sharp-eyed, and deeply cynical detective from the NCPD's elite homicide and missing persons unit was formally assigned the increasingly high-profile and politically sensitive vanishing philanthropist's wife case. Her name was Lena Hansen, and she had a hard-earned, citywide reputation for seeing through the carefully constructed, diamond-hard facades of Nova City's rich and powerful. The Thorne Mansion staff, when she interviewed them one by one, were impeccable models of polite, deferential, and utterly infuriating obstruction, their loyalty clearly bought and paid for many times over. They claimed, with perfectly rehearsed sincerity, to know nothing, only that Mrs. Thorne had seemed distressed, unwell, before she apparently left of her own accord. And Julian Thorne himself? When Hansen finally sat across from him in his vast, intimidating, art-filled study, He was a flawless picture of carefully managed, camera-ready grief. His public statements, overflowing with heartfelt concern and a desperate, tearful plea for his beloved, fragile, and confused wife's safe and immediate return. But Detective Lena Hansen, a woman who had seen too much of the darkness that lurked beneath glittering surfaces, had seen that particular look before in the cold, calculating eyes of guilty men. That subtle, almost imperceptible calculation beneath the smooth veneer of profound sorrow. Something was very, very wrong here. The game, as they say, with all its deadly secrets and hidden players, was well and truly afoot. Days later, with Elara still missing, and the voracious Nova City press beginning to sniff around the edges of a scandal far juicier than mere marital strife, a stoic, sharp-eyed detective from the NCPD's elite homicide and missing persons unit was assigned the increasingly high-profile vanishing philanthropist's wife case. Her name was Lena Hansen, and she had a reputation for seeing through the carefully constructed facades of the city's powerful. The game, as they say, was afoot. While Julian Thorne played the grieving husband to the flashing cameras, his face a mask of anguished concern that graced the front pages of every newspaper and led every news broadcast, Detective Lena Hansen saw something else entirely. She saw the predatory glint, almost imperceptible, in his otherwise perfectly sorrowful eyes. The subtle, almost involuntary tightening of his sculpted jaw whenever Elara's name was mentioned with anything less than fawning reverence. The too perfect, almost theatrical polish of his profound sorrow. This wasn't just a grieving husband desperately searching for his lost love. This, her finely owned gut screamed, was a man with dark, dangerous secrets, a man capable of anything. And Lena's instincts, sharpened by years of navigating the murky, treacherous undercurrents of Nova City's elite and their sordid affairs, told her unequivocally that this case reeked of something far more sinister, far more complex than a simple tragic disappearance. She was sharp, notoriously relentless, with a quiet, unwavering intensity that often unnerved those she interviewed, especially those who believed themselves above scrutiny. And she carried a past, a deeply personal history shrouded in shadows, a history that had instilled in her a profound, almost visceral, and entirely justified distrust of powerful, charming men like Julian Thorne. They were, in her experience, far too adept at hiding the pervasive rot beneath the dazzling, seductive shine. Her initial, carefully orchestrated visit to the sprawling Thorne mansion only served to confirm her deepest suspicions. The staff, a veritable legion of uniformed silent ghosts, were impeccably polite, almost painfully deferential, and utterly, infuriatingly unhelpful. Their answers to her pointed questions were clearly rehearsed, their eyes carefully, unnervingly blank. Yes, Mrs. Thorne had been unwell recently, distraught even. Yes, they believed she had left of her own accord, packing a single small bag. No, of course, they hadn't seen anything unusual leading up to her departure. Julian himself, when Hansen finally managed to sit across from him in his cavernous, art-filled, and frankly intimidating study, was a veritable masterpiece of controlled, understated composure. He spoke in clipped, measured tones, his rich voice laced with just the right amount of sorrowful bewilderment, his handsome face a study in tragic loss. He had absolutely no idea why Elara would leave him, where she might possibly have gone. No major arguments, he insisted smoothly, just a misunderstanding, perhaps some unfortunate words exchanged in the heat of a minor disagreement. Perhaps, he hinted delicately, the well-known hormonal fluctuations of pregnancy had made her overly emotional, tragically unstable even. He even, with a sigh of regret, alluded to a vague family history of, well, psychological fragility. It was all so smooth, so perfectly practiced, it was frankly insulting to Hansen's intelligence. And then, of course, there was the rather convenient matter of the mansion's state-of-the-art, supposedly foolproof security system. The multiple cameras covering the main exits, the private elevator, the very hallways Elara would have undoubtedly used to leave the estate, all conveniently malfunctioning due to an unexpected power surge the very night she vanished. The sullen head of Thorne's private security team had mumbled this excuse while intently studying his expensive Italian shoes. Right, a billionaire's high-tech fortress with faulty wiring at the most critical juncture. Lena nearly scoffed aloud. This stank to high heaven. Frustrated but undeterred by the wall of polite obstruction, Hansen began to dig meticulously into Elara's life, carefully, painstakingly sifting through her personal belongings, her appointments, her correspondence, searching for any clue, any whisper of the truth that lay hidden beneath the surface of this picture-perfect tragedy. In Elara's meticulously organized, leather-bound day planner, a beautiful volume filled with mundane appointments for charity committee meetings and routine prenatal checkups, Hansen finally found it. A tiny, almost invisible notation, scribbled in faint, spidery pencil in the margin of a date 3 weeks prior to her disappearance. CK, Insurance. Red Rock. So small, so innocuous, so cryptic, it could have been anything. A reminder for a dental cleaning? A note about a gift? But Elara Vance, from everything Hansen was learning about her, didn't seem like the type for careless, meaningless doodles. CK? Cipher Key? Could it really be that simple? And Red Rock? A specific place? A password? A code name for a contact? It wasn't much, certainly not enough for a warrant, but it was a crack, a tiny tantalizing fissure in the smooth, impenetrable wall of deception Julian Thorne had so expertly erected around his life, around Elara's disappearance. This wasn't the act of a woman who had simply run away in an emotional, irrational fit. This, Hansen felt with a growing certainty, was the mark of a woman who had a plan. This almost invisible notation significantly strengthened Hansen's burgeoning suspicion that Elara didn't just run. She ran with something vital, or perhaps to something or someone equally crucial. Meanwhile, in another opulent corner of the glittering, predatory city of Nova, Isabelle Izzy Monet was also navigating her own treacherous, high-stakes landscape. Ambitious, breathtakingly beautiful, and utterly, terrifyingly ruthless, Izzy had clawed her way up from a distinctly non-glamorous background into the rarefied, unforgiving air of Nova City's most exclusive elite. She was now a permanent, much-photographed fixture at the most exclusive parties, her name whispered with a mixture of envy and disdain in the city's most influential gossip columns, her connections as carefully cultivated and jealously guarded as her flawless complexion. Julian Thorne wasn't just a casual lover to her, another notch on her bedpost. He was her golden ticket, her ultimate prize, her passport to a life of unimaginable wealth and unassailable status. In the chaotic days following Elara's shocking disappearance, Izzy expertly played the part of the concerned, devoted confidant, offering Julian carefully calibrated comfort, her presence a constant, cloying, and subtly possessive reminder of her unwavering availability. But beneath the perfectly applied sympathetic facade, a cold, sharp fear gnawed at her, a fear that threatened to unravel her carefully constructed world. What if their passionate, reckless affair became public knowledge? What if Elara hadn't just vanished into thin air, but was, at this very moment, planning to expose them, to ruin everything? Izzy had seen powerful, ruthless men discard inconvenient, suddenly problematic mistresses before with chilling efficiency. She was grimly determined that she wouldn't suffer the same ignominious fate. She needed to secure her position, to make herself utterly indispensable to Julian, now more than ever before. Her already considerable anxiety escalated into outright panic when Julian, in a rare moment of what she suspected was either genuine vulnerability or, more likely, calculated, manipulative weakness designed to test her loyalty, revealed the true, terrifying depth of his current fear. They were in his private, soundproofed study, the same opulent room where he'd so convincingly performed his grieving husband act for Detective Hansen just days before. The air was thick with the cloying scent of his expensive single-malt whiskey, an unspoken, almost palpable panic. "She might have evidence, Izzy," he'd hissed, his voice a low, strained whisper, all the usual sophisticated charm stripped away to reveal the raw, ugly ambition and fear beneath. "Damning evidence of my other financial dealings." He waved a dismissive, impatient hand, but his eyes, usually so confident, so commanding, were sharp, deeply worried. "The Thorne Legacy Foundation, it's not quite as pristine, as purely altruistic as it appears on the glossy charity ball invitations, my dear." He then confessed, his carefully chosen words tumbling out in a torrent of frantic self-preservation, that the foundation, his sainted public legacy, was, in significant part, a massive, incredibly sophisticated money laundering operation, an intricate mechanism for moving and concealing vast, untraceable sums of illicit cash from questionable sources. And he added, his gaze pinning her with an intensity that made her shiver. Some of those creatively structured, deniable accounts were unfortunately in her name. Small ones, of course, he assured her hastily, nothing she would have noticed or needed to question, just a little something to ensure her continued loyalty, her absolute discretion. A token of his affection. If Elara had managed to get her hands on proof of that, if she possessed the digital records, the transaction histories, the incriminating emails, it could mean significant jail time. For both of them. Izzy felt the blood drain from her face, a cold dread gripping her heart. This wasn't just about a messy, potentially career-damaging divorce or a temporary public scandal anymore. This was about prison. About losing absolutely everything she'd fought so desperately, so ruthlessly to attain. That night, staring at her own haunted reflection in the cold, modern, unforgiving expanse of her Nova City penthouse apartment, Isabelle Monet made a chilling, silent resolve. She would find Elara Vance, and that damning CK, whatever the hell it was, before anyone else did. She had to. Her entire gilded survival depended on it. Detective Lena Hansen, meanwhile, felt like she was walking a precarious, almost invisible tightrope, suspended high above an abyss of well-guarded secrets and expertly crafted lies. Every official lead seemed to evaporate into thin air. Every potential witness either clammed up tight or offered carefully scripted, unhelpful platitudes. The official story, a distraught, hormonal pregnant wife, an unfortunate, tragic misunderstanding, was being pushed hard and relentlessly by Julian's phalanx of high-powered, exorbitantly expensive lawyers and his equally formidable PR machine. But the CK Insurance Red Rock note, that tiny enigmatic scribble, burned in her mind, a persistent, nagging question. Then a potential breakthrough of sorts. During a tense follow-up interview at the Thorne mansion, a nervous, visibly frightened young housekeeper, her hands twisting compulsively in her starched apron, hesitantly, almost inaudibly, mentioned something Elara had apparently been looking at with intense interest in Julian's private study library a few weeks before she disappeared. A strange symbol, detective, the housekeeper had whispered, her eyes darting nervously towards the closed study door, as if Julian himself might materialize. In one of Mr. Thorne's old leather-bound books, like a snake, a serpent eating its own tail. The serpent coil. Hansen's blood ran cold. She'd heard hushed, fearful whispers of that sigil before, in connection to long unsolved high-level white-collar crimes, to powerful, seemingly untouchable figures operating in the deepest, darkest shadows of Nova City. Suddenly, with a sickening lurch, the disparate, confusing pieces began to click into a terrifying, shadowy, and potentially explosive picture. Elara Vance hadn't just stumbled upon a commonplace, tawdry affair. She'd stumbled, blindly, into the gilded, venomous lair of a dangerous predator, a predator whose celebrated philanthropic facade concealed a vast, sprawling criminal enterprise. And that serpent coil, Hansen suspected with a chilling certainty, was the hidden key to unlocking it all. The hunt was most definitely on, but the question remained, sharp and unsettling. Who exactly was the hunter, and who, ultimately, irrevocably, would be the hunted? Far from the glittering, dangerous trap of Nova City, far from the increasingly prying eyes of determined detectives and the desperate, self-serving schemes of ambitious mistresses, Elara Vance finally allowed herself to breathe the crisp, clean, indifferent air of Red Rock Canyon, Arizona. She wasn't hiding, not really. Not anymore. She was preparing. The CK, the Cipher Key, that Detective Hansen was so desperately seeking, the evidence Izzy Monet was so terrified of, wasn't just simple insurance against a rainy day. It was a meticulously crafted, devastatingly effective weapon, and Elara, with a grim, newfound resolve, was about to carefully, deliberately load the first critical bullet. Far from the glittering, dangerous trap of Nova City, far from the increasingly prying eyes of determined detectives and the desperate, self-serving schemes of ambitious mistresses, Elara Vance finally allowed herself to breathe the crisp, clean, indifferent air of Red Rock Canyon, Arizona. She wasn't hiding, not really. Not anymore. She was preparing. The CK, the Cipher Key, that Detective Hansen was so desperately seeking, the evidence Izzy Monet was so terrified of, wasn't just simple insurance against a rainy day. It was a meticulously crafted, devastatingly effective weapon, and Elara, with a grim, newfound resolve, was about to carefully, deliberately load the first critical bullet. They called her a runaway, didn't they? A fragile, emotional, hormonal pregnant woman who simply couldn't handle the truth of her husband's minor indiscretions. They had absolutely no idea, not a clue, that she was, in fact, a five-star general marshalling her formidable forces in the stark, silent heart of the unforgiving desert, a silent, avenging warrior meticulously sharpening her blades for the war that was inevitably coming. Her sanctuary, her temporary fortress, was a small, unassuming, almost primitive adobe cottage, nestled deep within the canyon's protective crimson embrace, miles from any paved road, any curious passerby, or any prying, unwelcome eye. It belonged, in a loose sense, to Miles Corbin, her oldest, truest, and perhaps now only friend. Miles was a man of few words but profound, unwavering loyalty, his quiet intensity a comforting, grounding presence in Elara's chaotic, imploding world. An ex-military tech forensics expert, a ghost who could navigate the darkest corners of the digital world with effortless ease, he'd seen enough of the darkest sides of human nature during his service to be unsurprised by Julian Thorne's treachery, and he now possessed a unique, highly specialized skill set that was about to become utterly, critically invaluable. He'd helped Elara secure this remote, untraceable bolt hole months ago. A grim, unspoken contingency plan hatched in hushed, fearful tones late one night after Elara's first, faint, terrifying suspicions about Julian's potential for unimaginable treachery had begun to surface, poisoning her peace of mind. "Just in case, Elara," he'd said, his usually warm eyes uncharacteristically serious, almost cold. "Men like Thorne, they don't leave loose ends, they eliminate threats. You need a place to go, a place no one knows." At the time, she'd almost laughed, dismissing it as Miles being overly protective, his covert military training making him see sinister threats and shadowy conspiracies where none, surely, could exist in her perfect, gilded life. How tragically, catastrophically wrong she had been. How naive. Now, the sun-baked adobe cottage, with its sparse, functional furnishings and its breathtaking, indifferent view of the raw, majestic desert, was her war room. It was Miles, her rock, her confidant, who months before the devastating, soul-shattering revelation in her opulent Nova City bedroom had first dared to voice the unthinkable, to give shape to her formless, creeping dread. Elara, desperate for an anchor in her increasingly turbulent emotional sea, had finally, hesitantly, confided in him about the unsettling, inexplicable changes in Julian, the increasingly secretive late-night calls, the almost performative nature of his much-lauded philanthropy, the disturbing serpent coil sigil she'd accidentally glimpsed in his private financial ledger. She remembered the conversation with painful, searing clarity. They were sitting on the weathered wooden porch of her childhood home in Willow Creek during one of his rare, cherished visits, the crisp Montana air fresh and alive with the scent of pine and distant rain. "Elara," Miles had begun, his voice uncharacteristically low and serious, his gaze fixed on the distant, snow-capped mountains that had always been her symbol of steadfastness. "If your gut, your intuition, is telling you something is profoundly wrong, it probably is. Especially, forgive me, with a man like Julian Thorne. Men with that kind of unimaginable power, that kind of obscene money. They don't operate by the same set of rules as the rest of us. They make their own." He'd then, gently, almost reluctantly, as if afraid of frightening her further, advised her with a chilling prescience. "If you ever feel truly unsafe, Elara, or if you even begin to suspect something genuinely illegal, something dark, you need to gather digital evidence. Emails, financial records, encrypted communications, anything and everything you can discreetly access, and you need to store it securely, off-site, somewhere he can never ever find it. Think of it as your ultimate insurance policy." Insurance. The word had chilled her to the bone then, a cold premonition of a future she couldn't bear to imagine. But she'd listened. His quiet, unshakable conviction, his deep, unspoken concern for her, had been far more persuasive than any loud, alarmist rhetoric could ever have been. So she had begun, discreetly at first, then with a growing, desperate urgency, to meticulously, almost obsessively collect the scattered, damning puzzle pieces of Julian Thorne's other life. His real life. And the Cipher Key? Oh, the Cipher Key was a true masterpiece of digital devastation, a miniature Pandora's box filled with a cornucopia of Julian's carefully buried sins. terabytes upon terabytes of damning, irrefutable data, a meticulously curated, cross-referenced archive of Julian Thorne's darkest, most secret dealings. It held undeniable, incontrovertible proof of a sprawling, intricate network of anonymous offshore accounts, numbered shell corporations, and a systematic, deeply entrenched bribery operation that reached into the highest, most sacrosanct echelons of Nova City's political and judicial systems, implicating judges, senators, and even, to Elara's horror, law enforcement officials. Many of these illicit, multi-million-dollar transactions, these slimy, invisible tendrils of deep-seated corruption, were subtly, almost invisibly, marked with that same ominous, recurring serpent coil sigil she'd first seen in his private ledger. A secret handshake among the corrupt. The key also contained irrefutable evidence of Julian ruthlessly, systematically, using the Thorne Legacy Foundation, his much-lauded monument to public benevolence and civic virtue, as a sophisticated, global tool to manipulate volatile financial markets, to ruthlessly ruin unsuspecting business rivals through carefully orchestrated insider trading schemes, and to funnel vast, unimaginable sums of laundered, untraceable money into his myriad personal coffers. But beyond the cold, hard, damning data of complex financial crimes, the Cipher Key held something far more personal, something so profoundly shocking, so morally repugnant about Julian's true, hidden character, his private, twisted depravities, that it would not just ruin him financially, not just land him in prison for decades, but would utterly, irrevocably obliterate his carefully crafted, universally beloved public image beyond any hope of repair or redemption. This was the true, poisoned core of her insurance, the devastating element that went far beyond mere white-collar crime into something truly, irredeemably monstrous. What was it, exactly? Even now, alone in the desert silence, Elara could barely bring herself to name it, to confront its full, hideous implications. But its undeniable, documented existence on that tiny drive fueled her grim, unyielding resolve. And this digital doodle doomsday device, this key to Julian's destruction, was armed and ready. Miles, with his unparalleled expertise in cutting-edge cyber warfare and sophisticated counterintelligence techniques, had personally, painstakingly ensured it. The Cipher Key was protected by a virtually unbreakable, multi-layered military-grade encryption, accessible only by Elara herself using a specific, complex, and unrepeatable biometric sequence. A unique combination of her fingerprint, her voice pattern an octave higher than normal, and a long, obscure passphrase from a childhood poem her grandmother used to recite. But more than that, much more. It was ingeniously, diabolically rigged with a dead man's switch of terrifying efficiency. If the primary, most damning files weren't accessed, and a specific time-sensitive all-clear protocol initiated by Elara every 24 hours without fail, or if any unauthorized attempt was made to tamper with its core programming, to forcibly decrypt its contents, or even to subject it to an excessive magnetic field, the entire unredacted, unedited archive, every last damning byte, would automatically, irreversibly, upload simultaneously to a carefully curated, globally diverse list of international news outlets, financial regulators, and aggressive law enforcement agencies across 3 different continents. Miles had even, with his typical thoroughness, built in multiple, geographically dispersed redundancies, numerous hidden servers, encrypted decoy data streams, and anonymous mirror sites. It was her ultimate ace in the hole, her terrifyingly potent guarantee that Julian couldn't simply make her disappear, make her another tragic statistic, without the entire world knowing exactly why, and exactly what he had done. Even with this powerful, digital sword of Damocles hanging precariously over Julian's oblivious, arrogant empire, Elara wrestled daily, hourly, with a maelstrom of conflicting, agonizing emotions. Guilt, sharp and piercing as broken glass, for the pure, unadulterated love she once felt for him, for the sacred, now broken vows she had made with such hope in her heart. Fear, a cold, constant, unwelcome companion, for her own physical safety, for the life of the man who was, despite everything, still her friend, but more importantly, overwhelmingly, for the fragile, innocent new life stirring restlessly, hopefully, within her. The baby's gentle, insistent kicks were a constant, poignant, almost unbearable reminder of exactly what and who was at stake. But overriding it all, eclipsing even the fear and the lingering, painful ghost of love, was a monstrous, unyielding, and undeniable truth about Julian. a truth that fueled her grim determination, steeling her resolve, hardening her heart against any lingering sentimentality. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every single life he'd carelessly, callously, and calculatingly ruined in his relentless, insatiable pursuit of ever more power and ever more money. Julian, meanwhile, blissfully unaware of the digital guillotine poised above his neck, was far from idle. His initial, fleeting shock at Elara's unexpected disappearance had quickly, predictably, morphed into a cold, calculated, and dangerous fury. He escalated his already considerable efforts to find her, to locate her, to neutralize the undefined but clearly significant threat she now represented. He hired a notoriously ruthless, international private security firm, a shadowy, deniable organization known only in whispered underworld circles as Wraith Services, led by an equally enigmatic, ghost-like operative known only by the chilling codename Wraith. Their brutal reputation was fearsome, almost legendary. They found anyone, silenced anything, anywhere in the world for the right, exorbitant price. Simultaneously, Julian, with the full, expensive might of his global PR machine, launched a sophisticated, insidious, and heartbreakingly effective media campaign. With perfectly timed, camera-ready, tear-filled eyes and a voice choked with carefully rehearsed emotion, he appeared on every major national television network, passionately, desperately pleading for the safe and immediate return of his beloved, fragile, and tragically confused wife. He subtly, expertly, and with devastating precision, painted Elara as an emotionally unstable and tragically vulnerable woman, confused and perhaps overwhelmed by the well-documented pressures and hormonal imbalances of her delicate pregnancy. Possibly, he hinted with a sorrowful shake of his head, in desperate need of urgent psychiatric help and support. He even, with a masterful touch of feigned reluctance, insinuated that she'd become increasingly paranoid, perhaps even delusional, in the weeks leading up to her inexplicable departure. The press, for the most part, hungry for any salacious detail, lapped it up, their headlines screaming of a tragic, almost Shakespearean family drama, a beautiful, broken, and mentally fragile heiress on the run from her own demons. Elara saw one of these gut-wrenching, infuriating broadcasts on a smuggled, encrypted news feed Miles had ingeniously managed to set up for her through a secure, untraceable satellite link in their remote desert hideaway. Watching Julian's masterful, Oscar-worthy performance, his handsome eyes glistening with perfectly simulated crocodile tears as he spoke with such convincing passion of his undying love and his desperate, all-consuming concern for her well-being, her simmering, residual heartbreak ignited into a cold, white-hot, and utterly unquenchable fury. How dare he? How dare he twist her pain, her legitimate fear, her very pregnancy, into a despicable weapon against her, a cynical, calculated tool to discredit her in the eyes of the world before she could even utter a single, damning word of truth. This wasn't just about finding her anymore, she realized with a sickening lurch. This was about methodically, systematically destroying her credibility, ensuring that if or when she ever surfaced, no one, absolutely no one, would believe a single word she said. "He's trying to make me look crazy, Miles," she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage so profound it almost choked her. "So that whatever I say, whatever I reveal, they'll just dismiss it as the incoherent, pitiful ravings of a madwoman." This grotesquely public, utterly shameless betrayal, this calculated, cold-blooded character assassination on a global stage, only served to solidify her already formidable determination. There would be no quiet, negotiated return now. No possibility of a discreet, face-saving settlement. Julian Thorne had to be stopped, utterly and completely. His entire corrupt, gilded edifice had to be brought crashing, ignominiously down. "He's left me no choice, Miles," she said, her voice now devoid of any tremor, her eyes as hard and unforgiving as the desert landscape outside their window. "He wants a war? By God, he'll get one. He has no idea who he's dealing with." Miles, ever the stoic pragmatist, nodded slowly, his expression unreadable, but his eyes filled with a deep, unspoken understanding and a fierce, protective loyalty. He understood her incandescent fury, her need for justice, but he also knew, with a soldier's grim realism, that they needed powerful, uncompromised allies if they were to have even a sliver of a chance against a man as powerful, as ruthless, and as well-connected as Julian Thorne. "There's someone," he said finally, after a long, thoughtful silence, his voice quiet but firm. "An old military buddy of mine, sharp as a tack, utterly fearless, and owes me a couple of significant favors. Works as a senior investigative journalist now, for the Nova City Chronicle. Top of her game. Veronica Slate. They call her Ronnie. If anyone in that godforsaken city is willing to truly take on Thorne, and actually has the skills, the resources, and the sheer guts to do it right, to see it through to the bitter end, it's her. When the time is right, Elara, when you're absolutely ready to make your move, she might just be our best, perhaps our only, shot at getting the unvarnished truth out there to the world." Elara considered this, her mind racing. A journalist. Someone outside the compromised, corrupt systems Julian undoubtedly controlled, or at the very least, heavily influenced. It was a significant risk, a gamble with impossibly high stakes. But staying silent, cowering in the desert while Julian systematically destroyed her reputation and hunted her down, letting him control the entire narrative, was an even greater, more certain path to destruction. The name, Veronica Ronnie Slate, echoed in her mind, a tiny, unexpected flicker of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to stop just preparing for war and start actively, strategically, recruiting her army. Back in Nova City, weeks into her frustrating, stonewalled investigation, Detective Lena Hansen felt the invisible, suffocating walls closing in around her. Every official avenue she pursued was a meticulously constructed dead end. Every polite inquiry met with a smoother, even more polite, but utterly firm stone wall, erected by Julian Thorne's formidable and notoriously aggressive legal team and his vast unseen web of influential, highly placed friends. But Elara's cryptic, almost forgotten note, CK Insurance, Red Rock, kept nagging at her, a persistent, insistent whisper in the back of her otherwise logical, methodical mind. Red Rock Canyon, Arizona. It was a ridiculously long shot, a wild, almost desperate guess based on nothing more than a forward scribble and a detective's increasingly frayed intuition. But it was, she realized with a grimace, significantly more than she currently had. She decided then and there to take a monumental risk, to step far outside the compromised official channels that seemed so hell-bent on protecting Thorne and his pristine public image. She needed someone who wasn't afraid to dig where they weren't supposed to. Someone with an unquenchable nose for deeply buried corruption and the sheer, unadulterated courage to expose it to the harsh light of day, regardless of the consequences. She thought of a name, a byline she'd seen many times on some of Nova City's most explosive, most controversial investigative pieces. Veronica Ronnie Slate, the fearless, famously take-no-prisoners, Pulitzer-hopeful journalist at the struggling but still respected Nova City Chronicle. The very same journalist Miles Corbin, Elara's unseen desert guardian, had just moments before mentioned to Elara, hundreds of miles away in the stark, desolate, and deceptively beautiful silence of the Arizona desert. Two separate, determined paths to the same explosive truth, unbeknownst to each other, were about to converge with the undeniable, unstoppable force of an impending and potentially catastrophic desert storm. Back in Nova City, weeks into her frustrating, stonewalled investigation, Detective Lena Hansen felt the invisible, suffocating walls closing in around her. Every official avenue she pursued was a meticulously constructed dead end. Every polite inquiry met with a smoother, even more polite, but utterly firm stonewall erected by Julian Thorne's formidable and notoriously aggressive legal team and his vast unseen web of influential, highly placed friends. But Elara's cryptic, almost forgotten note, CK Insurance, Red Rock, kept nagging at her, a persistent, insistent whisper in the back of her otherwise logical, methodical mind. Red Rock Canyon, Arizona. It was a ridiculously long shot, a wild, almost desperate guess based on nothing more than a forward scribble and a detective's increasingly frayed intuition. But it was, she realized with a grimace, significantly more than she currently had. She decided then and there to take a monumental risk, to step far outside the compromised official channels that seemed so hell-bent on protecting Thorne and his pristine public image. She needed someone who wasn't afraid to dig where they weren't supposed to. Someone with an unquenchable nose for deeply buried corruption and the sheer, unadulterated courage to expose it to the harsh light of day, regardless of the consequences. She thought of a name, a byline she'd seen many times on some of Nova City's most explosive, most controversial investigative pieces. Veronica Ronnie Slate, the fearless, famously take-no-prisoners, Pulitzer-hopeful journalist at the struggling but still respected Nova City Chronicle. The very same journalist Miles Corbin, Elara's unseen desert guardian, had just moments before mentioned to Elara, hundreds of miles away in the stark, desolate, and deceptively beautiful silence of the Arizona desert, two separate, determined paths to the same explosive truth, unbeknownst to each other, were about to converge with the undeniable, unstoppable force of an impending and potentially catastrophic desert storm. In a city quite literally built on secrets, a glittering metropolis where power and money invariably whispered then shouted, louder than justice, two fiercely independent women who had never met, whose paths had never crossed, were about to inadvertently become Julian Thorne's absolute worst, most unimaginable nightmare. Detective Lena Hansen, her patience worn thin, her frustration mounting with each slammed bureaucratic door and each smoothly evasive, lawyer-vetted answer, finally made the fateful call. She arranged to meet Veronica Ronnie Slate, not in her sterile NCPD office, but in a dimly lit, discreet, out-of-the-way coffee shop in a forgotten corner of the city. The kind of place where hushed, clandestine conversations could be had without undue fear of prying ears or unwanted surveillance. Ronnie, with her perpetually cynical, world-weary gaze, her signature worn leather jacket that had seen better decades, and a battered reporter's notebook that seemed permanently, almost organically, attached to her hand, was something of a living legend in the often staid world of Nova City journalism. She'd single-handedly taken down corrupt city councilmen with her meticulously researched exposés, exposed massive corporate fraud rings with her fearless reporting, and generally made life exceedingly uncomfortable, if not downright miserable, for many of the city's less savory, more entitled power brokers. She listened intently, her sharp eyes missing nothing, as Hansen carefully, cautiously laid out the bare, unsettling bones of the Elara Vance case. The beautiful pregnant wife's suspicious, almost too perfect disappearance, Julian Thorne's impeccably smooth, almost too polished denials, the conveniently, inexplicably malfunctioning security cameras at the precise moment of Elara's departure. Standard rich guy hiding something playbook, right? Then Ronnie, with a grim, knowing smile playing on her lips, dropped a bombshell of her own, one that made Hansen sit up straight, her coffee forgotten. "Julian Thorne," she said, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur, a smile touching her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Funny you should mention his illustrious name, Detective. I've been quietly, very quietly, investigating the much-lauded Thorne Legacy Foundation for the better part of 6 months now." She leaned forward, her voice dropping even further, forcing Hansen to lean in as well. "I strongly suspect, though I can't yet definitively prove it, that it's one of the biggest, most sophisticated, and deeply entrenched money laundering schemes in the state, possibly even the entire country. All those glittering, self-congratulatory charity galas? The perfect, unimpeachable cover. Millions upon millions flow in from questionable sources, and millions upon millions flow out, squeaky clean, to offshore accounts and untraceable shell corporations, cleaner than a televangelist's Sunday sheets. And that peculiar serpent coil sigil you mentioned the terrified housekeeper saw Elara looking at? I've seen it too, Detective, many times. In fact, it's linked to some very shadowy, very anonymous offshore accounts, all inexplicably connected to the Foundation's humanitarian projects. But, she admitted, her voice laced with a frustration that keenly mirrored Hansen's own, she lacked the concrete, irrefutable proof, the kind of undeniable smoking gun that could actually bring a titan like Thorne down. He was too well insulated, too powerful, his connections too deep, his lawyers too ruthless. Hansen felt a sudden electric surge of adrenaline, a familiar hunter's thrill. This was it. This was the missing piece, the crucial connection she'd been desperately, almost blindly searching for. Taking a deep breath, a calculated, potentially career-ending risk, she shared Elara's cryptic, tantalizing note. "CK, Insurance, Red Rock." "Cipher Key, you think?" Ronnie mused aloud, her eyes no longer cynical but now alight with a fierce, predatory gleam. "It has to be. And Red Rock. A physical location. If Elara Vance has managed to squirrel away hard evidence of Thorne's massive financial crimes, Detective, That's not just a strong motive for him to want to silence her permanently. That's a goddamn powder keg waiting for a match. As if on cue, a testament to the universe's occasionally wicked sense of timing, while Ronnie was still processing the immense implications of this new information, her heavily encrypted work phone buzzed insistently on the chipped Formica tabletop between them. An anonymous, heavily proxied message. It was short, almost curt to the point. I have information on Julian Thorne. Devastating, world-shattering information. If you can prove you're trustworthy, prove you're not already on his extensive and generous payroll, I'll share a taste, a preview. It was signed not with a name, but only with a stark, poignant image of a single, delicately pressed wildflower. Ronnie's heart hammered against her ribs. Could it possibly be Elara Vance, reaching out from the shadows? She quickly, silently, showed the cryptic message to Hansen. This could be our break, Lena, Ronnie breathed, her voice tight with a mixture of dawning excitement and palpable fear. Our big one. Or, she added, her journalistic skepticism kicking back in, it could very well be an elaborate, dangerous trap. They agreed, after a moment of tense silence, to proceed with extreme, almost paranoid caution, to work together, unofficially, pooling their disparate resources and considerable expertise. A cop and a reporter, an unlikely alliance against a common, formidable enemy. What could go wrong? Over the next few nail-biting days, a delicate, high-stakes, and incredibly risky dance of encrypted communication began. Elara, guided by Miles's expert, almost invisible digital hand through layers of secure, untraceable channels, sent Ronnie a small, heavily encrypted file, a taste of the promised evidence as per their fragile agreement. It was just a few heavily redacted, almost indecipherable financial statements, but it was enough. Enough to clearly show multi-million-dollar wire transfers moving with bewildering speed through a labyrinth of anonymous shell corporations, all inexplicably linked directly to the supposedly benevolent Thorne Legacy Foundation, and, chillingly, to several accounts bearing the name of one Isabelle Izzy Monet. Ronnie, using her own considerable tech skills and a network of trusted, tight-lipped contacts in the financial underworld, painstakingly cross-referenced the fragmented information. It was genuine, undeniably, explosively genuine. This wasn't just big. This was huge, earth-shattering even. Exhilarated and simultaneously terrified in equal measure, Ronnie immediately shared this critical development with Hansen. Elara, in turn, having seen some of Ronnie's past fearless, hard-hitting articles on unrelated corporate and political corruption that Miles had managed to securely pull up for her, began to tentatively trust the tenacious, take-no-prisoners journalist. But she had one absolute, non-negotiable condition for any face-to-face meeting. Detective Lena Hansen, the one cop who had seemed to look at her with something other than pity or suspicion, had to be there. Elara had seen Hansen on the syndicated news reports about her own mysterious disappearance, had noted the detective's quiet, unyielding intensity, the conspicuous lack of fawning deference whenever the powerful Julian Thorne's name was mentioned. She sensed, with an intuition sharpened by fear and betrayal, a genuine, unshakable desire for justice in the detective's tired, steady eyes. A stark, refreshing contrast to the smarmy, performative concern of her duplicitous husband. The clandestine meeting was set, with layers of coded signals and last-minute changes of venue. An old, greasy spoon, 24-hour diner on the forgotten industrial outskirts of the Ashwood district. A deliberately neutral, utterly unassuming location, easily watched from multiple angles, yet unlikely to attract any unwanted attention from Nova City's elite. The very air in the diner hung thick and heavy with the cloying, inescapable smell of stale coffee, old grease, and faded dreams. Elara, cleverly disguised in a shapeless, oversized coat and a wide-brimmed face-shielding hat that cast her features into deep shadow, her pregnancy now visibly, undeniably apparent beneath the bulky layers, arrived with Miles, his imposing, silent presence a watchful, reassuring bulwark against the unknown. She was visibly stressed, pale and exhausted, the almost unbearable strain of the past harrowing weeks etched deeply onto her usually serene face, but her eyes, when she finally met Hansen's, burned with a fierce, almost feral, unwavering resolve. Hansen was already there, nursing a lukewarm cup of suspiciously black coffee in a cracked, scarred corner booth, with Ronnie Slate seated quietly, almost invisibly, beside her, introduced simply as a trusted civilian observer and consultant. Elara, her voice low but surprisingly steady, began to speak, the words tumbling out, a torrent of pain, betrayal, and meticulously gathered evidence. She laid out the full, horrifying scope of Julian's treachery, the intricate, diabolical web of financial deceit, the brazen bribery of public officials, the insidious corruption that snaked its venomous way through the very heart of Nova City's most respected institutions, all meticulously, damningly documented on the single, unassuming Cipher Key. She spoke with a chilling lack of emotion, of the serpent coil's pervasive influence, the labyrinthine network of offshore accounts, the unspeakably cynical way Julian had ruthlessly, systematically used the Thorne Legacy Foundation, their foundation, as his personal, untraceable piggy bank, and as a brutal, devastating weapon against his perceived enemies and unsuspecting business rivals. "He's not just a common cheat and a contemptible liar," Elara said, her voice finally trembling with a potent mixture of profound sorrow and barely suppressed, incandescent fury, her gaze locking with Hanson's. "He's a monster detective, a genuine monster, hiding behind a mask of philanthropy and charm. And this—" She clutched the small, innocuous-looking black cipher key tightly in her trembling hand, holding it up as if it were a sacred, avenging relic. "This, Detective Hanson, this will prove it, beyond any shadow of a doubt, to the entire unsuspecting world." Just as she was about to hand over a carefully prepared, encrypted copy of the key, the relative, deceptive quiet of the Ashwood diner was violently, irrevocably shattered. The front door burst open with a deafening crash, and two large, brutally menacing figures, dressed in dark, nondescript tactical gear, stormed in. Wraith's men, without a doubt. They moved with the chilling, brutal efficiency of seasoned predators, their cold, dead eyes instantly scanning the diner, unerringly locking onto Elara's secluded corner table. Someone had talked. Someone had betrayed them. The horrifying, sickening realization hit Hanson like a physical blow. The mole. The mole in the NCPD. Thorne's reach extended even here, even now. Curiosity Element 3, the mole in NCPD, the chilling, devastating realization that Julian Thorne's corrupting influence had deeply infiltrated the very fabric of the city's law enforcement, making no one and nowhere truly safe. "NCPD, freeze!" Hanson yelled, her training kicking in, her hand already a blur as it flew to her holstered sidearm. But it was far too late to prevent the eruption of sudden, terrifying chaos. Miles, reacting with the lightning-fast, life-saving instincts of a seasoned soldier under fire, shoved Elara roughly but protectively towards the relative safety of the back of the booth, shielding her pregnant body with his own as he rose, a formidable obstacle, to meet the brutal, oncoming attackers. A brief, savage, and terrifyingly violent fight erupted in the confined space. Tables overturned with sickening crashes, plates and coffee cups shattered, sending shards of porcelain and hot liquid flying. Patrons screamed in terror, scrambling desperately for cover under flimsy tables. Their ordinary Tuesday afternoon turned into a scene from a nightmare. One of the heavily muscled goons, his face a mask of brutal intent, lunged for Elara, his thick-fingered hands outstretched like predatory claws, but Miles intercepted him with a bone-jarring, perfectly executed tackle that sent them both crashing into an adjacent booth. Hanson, meanwhile, her weapon now drawn and steady, engaged the second man, a blur of controlled motion and focused, deadly force. She managed, amidst the chaos and the screams, to shove Elara out a grimy, little-used back exit into the relative darkness of the stinking, refuse-strewn alleyway, shouting urgently into her radio for immediate priority backup. Even as Ronnie Slate, with a true journalist's ingrained, almost pathological instinct to document everything, was already capturing the brutal, unfolding chaos on her phone. The intermittent flash of her camera illuminating the savage, desperate struggle like strobes in a war zone. Hanson's prearranged, but deliberately and, as it turned out, wisely, limited due to her growing, sickening fear of leaks within the NCPD. Backup teams screeched to a halt at the diner's shattered front entrance within minutes, their sirens wailing, their weapons drawn. They managed, after a brief, violent struggle, to apprehend one of Wraith's dazed and bleeding men. But the other, the one who had grappled with Hanson, along with the elusive, ghost-like Wraith himself, who had apparently been coolly, remotely coordinating the entire botched abduction attempt from a nondescript black sedan parked just down the street, vanished like smoke into the sprawling, anonymous urban labyrinth of Nova City. As the discordant wail of the sirens finally began to fade and the immediate heart-stopping threat subsided, Hansen discovered, with a fresh wave of icy dread, that Wraith had left a chilling, personal parting gift. Her personal, unmarked vehicle, parked discreetly down the block, had a single, wilted, dead wildflower tucked with deliberate, mocking care under its driver's side windshield wiper. And on the driver's seat, a small, elegantly colorgraphed, unsigned note. It read, simply, "Julian Thorne has eyes and ears everywhere, detective. Everywhere. Even in your own beloved house. Stay away from what doesn't concern you. This is your only warning." The message and its horrifying implications were crystal clear. The mole wasn't just some low-level greedy informant. They were close. Terrifyingly, dangerously close. Very close indeed. Shaken to her core, but more undeterred than ever, with a partial, heavily encrypted copy of the devastating Cipher Key now securely in her possession, thanks to a last-minute, ingenious decoy Elara had cleverly prepared, anticipating just such a betrayal, and Ronnie's damning, high-resolution phone footage of the violent ambush providing irrefutable, time-stamped proof of the brutal attack and attempted kidnapping, the already astronomical stakes of this deadly game skyrocketed into the stratosphere. Hansen knew, with a certainty that chilled her blood, that the mole, whoever they were, meant they couldn't trust local channels. Not completely, not anymore. This was bigger, far bigger, and far more dangerous than even the NCPD could handle alone. This needed swift, decisive, and utterly incorruptible federal intervention. There was only one person she knew, one person in the entire sprawling federal apparatus, who had the necessary resources, the unquestionable jurisdiction, and the legendary, bulldog-like incorruptibility to handle a case of this magnitude and sensitivity. A man who, as it happened, owed her a very significant, very old favor from a nearly forgotten, deeply buried case from early in her career. She pulled out her burner phone, the untraceable one reserved for calls that could never, ever be officially logged or traced back to her. Her finger, steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins, hovered over a single, long-memorized number. It was time to call in the real cavalry. It was, without a doubt, time to contact FBI Special Agent Marcus Cole. The intricate, deadly net was tightening, inexorably, but it was no longer entirely clear, not even to the players themselves, who exactly was the spider, and who, in this lethal game of shadows and lies, was the unsuspecting, soon-to-be-devoured fly. Shaken to her core, but more undeterred than ever, with a partial, heavily encrypted copy of the devastating Cipher Key now securely in her possession, thanks to a last-minute, ingenious decoy Elara had cleverly prepared, anticipating just such a betrayal, and Ronnie's damning, high-resolution phone footage of the violent ambush providing irrefutable, time-stamped proof of the brutal attack and attempted kidnapping, the already astronomical stakes of this deadly game skyrocketed into the stratosphere. Hansen knew, with a certainty that chilled her blood, that the mole, whoever they were, meant they couldn't trust local channels, not completely, not anymore. This was bigger, and far more dangerous than even the NCPD could handle alone. This needed swift, decisive, and utterly incorruptible federal intervention. There was only one person she knew, one person in the entire sprawling federal apparatus, who had the necessary resources, the unquestionable jurisdiction, and the legendary bulldog-like incorruptibility to handle a case of this magnitude and sensitivity. A man who, as it happened, owed her a very significant, very old favor from a nearly forgotten, deeply buried case from early in her career. She pulled out her burner phone, the untraceable one reserved for calls that could never, ever be officially logged or traced back to her. Her finger, steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins, hovered over a single, long-memorized number. It was time to call in the real cavalry. It was, without a doubt, time to contact FBI Special Agent Marcus Cole. The intricate, deadly net was tightening, inexorably, but it was no longer entirely clear, not even to the players themselves, who exactly was the spider, and who, in this lethal game of shadows and lies, was the unsuspecting, soon-to-be-devoured fly. The Midas King, Julian Thorne, the undisputed master of intricate illusions and the ruthless manipulator of global fortunes, was about to receive a brutal, public lesson. Some things, once irrevocably broken, could never ever be gilded over again, especially not the scales of justice, however slowly they might grind. Detective Lena Hansen's urgent, encrypted call to FBI Special Agent Marcus Cole crackled with a suppressed, dangerous energy. Cole, a name whispered with a mixture of fear and respect in the highest echelons of federal law enforcement, was a legend in his own right. A no-nonsense, granite-faced, old-school investigator renowned for meticulously, patiently, and ultimately successfully dismantling the seemingly impregnable empires of arrogant white-collar criminals who genuinely believed themselves untouchable, above the law, beyond reproach. He listened impassively, his face an unreadable mask, as Hansen, her voice tight with controlled fury, laid out the explosive, rapidly escalating situation. A missing, vulnerable, pregnant wife, a billionaire husband with a sinister, hidden dark underbelly, a mysterious Cipher Key allegedly holding secrets that could potentially rock Nova City and indeed the nation to its very core. And now, chillingly, a confirmed, high-level mole operating with impunity within the ranks of the NCPD. He remembered Hansen, of course. She was a damn good cop, sharp, tenacious, with a solid, reliable gut and an inconvenient sense of morality. And he knew without a shadow of a doubt that she wouldn't be calling in that very old, very significant chit, unless this was big. Apocalyptically big. "Bring them in, Hansen," Cole had said finally, his voice devoid of any discernible emotion but carrying the unmistakable steely weight of absolute federal authority. "Secure federal location. My team, and only my team, will handle it from here. And Lena, watch your back. Thorne plays dirty." Within a matter of mere hours, a clandestine, high-security meeting was arranged in a sterile, windowless, soundproof conference room buried deep within the anonymous, fortified bowels of a secure federal building in downtown Nova City. Elara, still visibly shaken and pale from the terrifying diner ambush, but her eyes now burning with a new, harder, almost incandescent resolve, arrived with a grim-faced Miles Corbin, his protective, watchful presence a silent, reassuring shield against the unseen enemies that surely lurked. Detective Lena Hansen, looking exhausted but determined, and a visibly wired Ronnie Slate, who clutched her phone containing the explosive diner footage as if it were a holy, sacred relic, joined them moments later. Before them, at the head of a long, polished mahogany table, sat Agent Marcus Cole, flanked by two of his top, most trusted financial and cybercrime analysts, their faces impassive, their eyes missing nothing. The air in the room was thick with a tension so profound it was almost palpable, a silence broken only by the quiet hum of unseen surveillance equipment. Ronnie's damning phone footage of Wraith's heavily armed men storming the Ashwood Diner played in chilling, graphic detail on a large, wall-mounted monitor, the chaotic, brutal sounds of the sudden, desperate struggle filling the otherwise silent room with a raw, uncomfortable immediacy. Then, Hansen carefully, methodically presented the partial, heavily encrypted data from the decoy Cipher Key Elara had so cleverly provided. Cole's analysts, without a word, went to work immediately, their fingers flying across their specialized keyboards with breathtaking speed, their faces growing increasingly grim, almost incredulous, as the initial, complex layers of Julian Thorne's vast, labyrinthine financial empire began to slowly, painfully unfurl before their disbelieving eyes. Elara watched them, her heart pounding a frantic, suffocating rhythm against her ribs. She knew, with a certainty that made her feel physically ill, that she was more exposed, more vulnerable now than ever before. Julian undoubtedly knew she was in active contact with the authorities. Wraith's violent public attack was undeniable proof of that. He would be pulling every conceivable string, leveraging every corrupt official in his deep, well-lined pocket to find her, to silence her, permanently this time. This, she realized with a chilling clarity, was her last, best, and perhaps only chance. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she looked directly, unflinchingly, at Agent Marcus Cole. "Agent Cole," she began, her voice surprisingly steady, devoid of any tremor. "What Detective Hansen has, what you've just seen, is only a tiny fraction, a mere glimpse, of the truth. I have the original Cipher Key. Miles," she nodded towards her steadfast friend, "has kept it safe, and it is untouched." Miles gave a single, curt, affirmative nod from beside her. It contains everything, Agent. Everything. The complete unredacted records of the offshore accounts, the intricate details of the bribery schemes, the irrefutable evidence of how Julian cynically, ruthlessly used the Thorne Legacy Foundation, our foundation, to manipulate global markets and financially destroy his rivals, his friends, anyone who stood in his way. It names names, Agent Cole. It has dates, specific amounts, untraceable transaction codes. It shows the full, horrifying extent of the Serpent Coil network, its tentacles reaching into every dark corner of this city. Anne, she paused, the next words catching painfully in her throat, the memory of their discovery still raw, still agonizing. It contains other evidence. Evidence of a far more personal, far more heinous nature, but just as damning, if not, God forgive me, even more so. She wouldn't elaborate further on that particular horror, not yet. That soul-destroying unveiling was for a different, more painful, and far more public forum. I will give you full unrestricted biometric access to the original key, Agent Cole, the one with everything. But I need your unequivocal word. Full immunity from prosecution for myself and for Miles. Comprehensive, lifelong witness protection for myself, for Miles, and most importantly, for my unborn child. We will testify. We will tell the entire world everything we know, everything we've seen, everything he's done. But you, Agent Cole, you have to guarantee our safety. You have to promise us we'll live to see him fall. Agent Marcus Cole, a man not easily impressed, a man who had seen the very worst of human greed and depravity, listened intently, his gaze never leaving Elara's pale, determined face. He looked at the fiercely protective, silent man by her side, a man who clearly would die for her. He looked at the tired but resolute city detective and the hungry, fearless journalist, an unlikely but potent alliance. He saw the raw, unadulterated data flickering like digital poison on his analysts' screens, the intricate, damning web of shell corporations, the suspicious, multi-million-dollar wire transfers, the sheer breathtaking audacity of the shadowy Serpent Coil network. And he saw, with the clarity of a seasoned predator, the potential for the biggest, most significant financial takedown of his long and storied career. A legacy case. Mrs. Thorne, Miss Vance, he corrected himself, his voice for the first time holding a trace of something akin to respect. Given the preliminary and frankly astounding evidence you've already provided, and your unequivocal willingness to cooperate fully with this federal investigation, I believe we can and will secure the terms you've requested. But understand this, Miss Vance. Once we officially move on Julian Thorne, once we unleash the full power of the federal government against him, there is absolutely no turning back. This will not be a quiet affair. This will be a storm of epic proportions. I understand, Agent, Elara said, a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of profound relief, quickly followed by a renewed, steely resolve, hardening her already determined eyes. Let the storm come. It's long overdue. End this. Please, just end this nightmare. The next 72 hours were an almost surreal blur of intense, around-the-clock activity. The FBI, with Elara's full, unwavering cooperation, and Miles's invaluable, almost magical technical expertise, swiftly, almost effortlessly, decrypted and meticulously verified the terabytes of damning, explosive contents of the original Cipher Key. The information, as Elara had so understatedly promised, was nothing short of cataclysmic. It was, frankly, far worse, far more pervasive than even the hardened Agent Cole had initially imagined. The financial crimes alone were staggering, implicating dozens of high-profile, supposedly untouchable figures in Nova City's business, political, and even judicial spheres. The Serpent Coil network, it turned out, was not just a localized cancer. It was a global malignancy, its venomous tentacles eating away at the very core of the city's, and indeed the nation's, financial and political integrity. And the deeply personal shocker about Julian, the files Elara had been so hesitant to describe? It was a sickening, detailed digital dossier, complete with encrypted video and audio files, documenting a horrifying pattern of predatory behavior, of systematic exploitation of the vulnerable, all chillingly hidden beneath the carefully polished, universally admired layers of his public philanthropic gloss. This revelation, Cole knew, would not just incite public outrage. It would turn the world's lingering adoration for the Midas King into universal, unmitigated revulsion. Working with a speed and efficiency that was breathtaking to behold, the The FBI also, with chilling precision, identified and covertly neutralized the high-ranking NCPD mole, a highly decorated, widely respected captain on Julian Thorne's secret, illicit payroll. His quiet, internal arrest sent silent, terrified shockwaves through the compromised department. For Detective Lena Hansen, the almost forgotten wildflower clue Elara had so poignantly left on Julian's pillow weeks before suddenly clicked into sharp, poignant place, its symbolism now imbued with a heartbreaking clarity. Miles, with a rare, gentle smile, explained its private significance. A specific, rare, almost extinct wildflower from the windswept meadows near Elara's childhood home in Willow Creek, a flower Elara's beloved grandmother used to press carefully into her books of poetry, a secret, shared symbol between them that, in their family lore, simply meant truth will always, always find the light. It hadn't been a message for Julian, not really. It was a desperate, silent message of hope Elara had unknowingly left for herself, or perhaps for a future where someone, somewhere, might finally understand its quiet, resilient meaning. The FBI, now working in close, carefully vetted concert with a small, entirely trusted team from the increasingly purged NCPD that included a vindicated but still wary Detective Hansen, began to meticulously, covertly plan a coordinated, multi-agency takedown. The target, the upcoming highly publicized annual Nova City Philanthropic Ball, the glittering, undisputed crown jewel of Julian Thorne's elaborate public relations efforts, an ostentatious event where the city's entire social, political, and financial elite would be conveniently, vulnerably gathered in one opulent, easily contained ballroom. It was audacious, it was incredibly public, it was, for their purposes, absolutely perfect, a stage fit for the fall of a king. The night of the much-anticipated philanthropic ball arrived, a veritable symphony of flashing paparazzi camera bulbs, breathtaking designer gowns worth more than most people's homes, and the incessant, merry clinking of $1,000-a-bottle champagne flutes. The grand ballroom of the historic Nova Plaza Hotel was a dizzying, glittering sea of air kisses, Botox smiles, and the low, self-congratulatory hum of the city's uber-wealthy and immensely powerful. Julian Thorne, the Midas King himself, the man of the hour, stood at the flower-bedecked podium, resplendent and impossibly handsome in a custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo, his famous, charismatic face radiating an almost divine charm and effortless benevolence. He was in his absolute element, basking like a Roman emperor in the fawning, almost worshipful adulation of the city he genuinely, arrogantly believed he owned, lock, stock, and barrel. Isabelle Izzy Monet, draped in borrowed diamonds that blazed like angry stars in a daring, blood-red designer gown that left little to the imagination, clung possessively to his arm, her smile perhaps a little too bright, her eyes darting a little too nervously, a little too frequently, around the crowded, glittering room. She knew, somehow, with the primal instinct of a cornered animal, that the diamond-encrusted, exquisitely carpeted ground beneath her very expensive Louboutins was about to violently, irrevocably give way. As Julian, his voice resonating with practiced, convincing sincerity, launched into a soaring, eloquent speech about integrity, legacy, and the enduring, indomitable spirit of human giving, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift occurred in the opulent, flower-filled ballroom. Unseen, unheard by the oblivious, champagne-sipping crowd, FBI agents, their faces grim, their movements precise, along with a steely-eyed, vindicated Detective Lena Hansen and the imposing, implacable Agent Marcus Cole, moved silently, inexorably into their pre-assigned strategic positions, their combined presence a silent, ever-tightening noose around the unsuspecting Midas King. The moment Julian paused dramatically for the expected, thunderous applause, his handsome smile wide, confident, and utterly oblivious, Cole gave the almost invisible pre-arranged signal. Julian Thorne. Agent Marcus Cole's powerful, unamplified voice suddenly boomed through the abruptly, shockingly silent ballroom, cutting through the remnants of polite, sycophantic applause like the swift, cold blade of a guillotine. You are under arrest by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for conspiracy to commit financial fraud, multiple counts of federal money laundering, and violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Absolute, unadulterated chaos erupted. Gasps of disbelief, stifled screams of horror. The already frantic flashing of cameras became a blinding, disorienting, almost epileptic strobe. FBI agents, their movements swift, professional, and utterly efficient, moved in, expertly, almost gently, cuffing a visibly stunned, suddenly pale Julian Thorne, his handsome face now a grotesque mask of utter disbelief and dawning, uncomprehending horror. His legendary Midas touch, in that single, public, humiliating moment, had irrevocably turned to worthless, common ash. Beside him, Isabelle Monet, her face a mask of terror, realizing with sickening certainty that the game was well and truly over, that she was nothing more than a pretty, disposable, and now utterly inconvenient pawn in Julian's grand, corrupt, and ultimately doomed scheme, did the only thing a woman like her, a born survivor, could possibly do. She tried, desperately, frantically, to save herself. "He made me do it," she shrieked, her voice shrill and hysterical, clutching wildly at Agent Cole's unyielding arm as other less sympathetic agents moved inexorably to apprehend her. "I have information, so much information, I'll tell you everything. He's the real monster, not me. I'm a victim too." Her betrayal of her former lover and benefactor was swift, total, desperate, and to everyone who knew her even slightly, utterly, pathetically predictable. Julian Thorne, the once untouchable Midas King, the beloved, universally admired philanthropist, the secret puppeteer who had pulled so many of Nova City's most important strings, was led away in gleaming, unforgiving handcuffs, his carefully constructed, glittering world collapsing catastrophically around him in a disorienting, humiliating maelstrom of flashing camera lights, shouted questions from a suddenly ravenous press, and the horrified, titillated gasps of his former friends and acolytes. Ronnie Slate, positioned perfectly with her intrepid Nova City Chronicle news crew, her own camera rolling, broke the sensational, earth-shattering story globally within minutes of the arrest. Her calm, professional report a meticulous, damning, and utterly irrefutable indictment, backed by instantly released verified documents and chilling excerpts from the now legendary Cipher Key. The insidious Serpent Coil Network, that shadowy, powerful organization that had held Nova City in its corrupt, venomous grip for so long, began to publicly, spectacularly unravel, its terrified, high-ranking members scattering like panicked, guilty rats from a rapidly, irrevocably sinking ship. Justice, so long delayed, so cleverly denied, so arrogantly mocked, had finally, irrevocably arrived in Nova City. Not with a polite, apologetic whisper, but with a thunderous, public, and deeply satisfying crash. In the immediate, chaotic aftermath, as the metaphorical dust began to slowly, painfully settle on Julian Thorne's shattered, worthless empire, as the global headlines screamed of the almost unbelievable scandal of the century, Elara Vance, now safely, anonymously cocooned under the full, unwavering protection of the federal government, began to quietly, resolutely prepare for the long, arduous, and undoubtedly painful legal battle ahead. The Cipher Key, her desperate, dangerous gamble, had done its devastating work. Its horrifying, myriad secrets were now laid bare for a shocked and titillated world to see. But her personal journey, she knew with a weary, unshakable certainty, was far from over. The world watched, collectively holding its breath, wondering with a mixture of trepidation and morbid fascination what true, meaningful justice for the fallen Midas King and his disgraced, scattered enablers would, or even could, ultimately look like. In the immediate, chaotic aftermath, as the metaphorical dust began to slowly, painfully settle on Julian Thorne's shattered, worthless empire, as the global headlines screamed of the almost unbelievable scandal of the century, Elara Vance, now safely, anonymously cocooned under the full, unwavering protection of the federal government, began to quietly, resolutely prepare for the long, arduous, and undoubtedly painful legal battle ahead. The Cipher Key, her desperate, dangerous gamble, had done its devastating work. Its horrifying, myriad secrets were now laid bare for a shocked and titillated world to see. But her personal journey, she knew with a weary, unshakable certainty, was far from over. The world watched, collectively holding its breath, wondering with a mixture of trepidation and morbid fascination what true, meaningful justice for the fallen Midas King and his disgraced, scattered enablers would, or even could, ultimately look like. The Midas King was well and truly dethroned, wasn't he? His carefully polished 24-karat gold legacy had crumbled to common, worthless dust, his vast, interconnected empire of lies and deceit spectacularly, publicly exposed to the harsh, unforgiving glare of international scrutiny. But what of the woman who had dared to light the fuse that ignited this inferno? What became of Elara Vance, the once naively trusting wife who had been forged by betrayal into an unlikely, unwilling, yet ultimately triumphant warrior for truth? The downfall of Julian Thorne's seemingly impregnable empire was breathtakingly swift and brutally absolute, a magnificent house of gilded cards collapsing in a self-made hurricane of greed and hubris. The shocking, almost unbelievable revelations from the Cipher Key, meticulously detailed by Agent Cole's team and powerfully corroborated by Ronnie Slate's fearless, relentless journalism, sent seismic shockwaves through the very foundations of Nova City and far, far beyond. Arrests followed further arrests, a cascade of once untouchable figures falling like dominoes. Corrupt city officials whose greedy palms had been surreptitiously, repeatedly greased by Thorne's seemingly bottomless reserves of dirty money. Shady, high-flying financiers who had knowingly, eagerly enabled his complex, globe-spanning schemes, all inexorably linked by the insidious, poisonous tendrils of the now infamous Serpent Coil network. The public, once so quick, so eager to lionize Julian Thorne, the charming, beloved philanthropist, the man who could do no wrong, now recoiled in collective horror and profound universal disgust as the true, horrifying extent of his deeply embedded depravity was relentlessly, mercilessly laid bare for all to see. The outrage was palpable, a global, collective gasp of stunned disbelief, quickly followed by a deafening, angry roar for justice, for accountability, for heads to roll. And roll they did. Elara, far removed from the baying crowds, the endless media speculation, and the flashing, intrusive cameras, found a fragile, tentative peace in an undisclosed, heavily guarded safe house. Its idyllic, anonymous location known only to a tiny handful of trusted, vetted federal agents. Her baby, a healthy, beautiful, and blissfully unaware little girl with her mother's fiercely determined, intelligent eyes and a soft, surprising fuzz of dark, downy hair, was born amidst the tumultuous, public chaos of her biological father's spectacular, self-inflicted implosion. Elara named her Aurora for the new, hopeful dawn she so powerfully, so poignantly represented. A tiny, innocent, perfect beacon of hope and light in a world that had for so long seemed consumed by impenetrable, suffocating darkness. Holding Aurora close, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of her tiny, perfect heart against her own, Elara quietly, resolutely prepared to testify, to face her demons, to finally, fully speak her truth. The fight, she knew, wasn't truly over. In many ways, the hardest part was just beginning. But now, she wasn't fighting alone anymore. And she wasn't fighting just for herself, for her own vindication. She was fighting, with every fiber of her being, for Aurora's future. A future free from the poisonous, corrupting taint of Julian Thorne's dark, destructive legacy. A future bright with promise, not shadowed by lies. Her journey, she reflected as she rocked her sleeping daughter, had been nothing short of a brutal, terrifying baptism by fire. From a deeply betrayed, heartbroken wife, reeling from the agonizing, almost unbearable discovery of Julian's casual infidelity and the even more horrifying, world-altering realization of his vast, sprawling criminal enterprise, she had been forced to transform, to evolve, into an unlikely, reluctant catalyst for justice. It wasn't a role she had ever sought, never in her wildest dreams imagined for herself, but it was one she had ultimately, courageously embraced with a quiet, steely dignity and a fierce, unexpected intelligence that had surprised everyone who thought they knew her, perhaps, most profoundly even herself. Julian, in his monumental arrogance, had so carelessly, so contemptuously underestimated her, callously dismissing her as just another fragile, emotional, easily manipulated pawn in his grand, intricate game of power and deception. He had never truly seen, or perhaps never bothered to look for, the unyielding steel in her spine. The quiet, indomitable resilience forged in the unassuming, down-to-earth honesty of her Willow Creek upbringing. He had never understood, not for a single moment, that her innate compassion, the very quality he had likely found so quaintly, amusingly provincial, was in fact the very source of her greatest, most underestimated strength. What a fool he had been. What a terrible, tragic fool. And now the entire world knew it. And what of the other, now somewhat lesser players in this sprawling high-stakes drama? Isabelle Izzy Monet, the ruthlessly ambitious mistress whose smug, knowing smirk had been one of the first, jarring cracks in Elara's once perfect world, found her own carefully constructed gilded cage rattling precariously. Faced with irrefutable, damning evidence of her willing, eager complicity in Thorne's extensive money laundering schemes, her own flamboyant signature scrawled across incriminating documents unearthed by the relentless Cipher Key, Izzy, true to her opportunistic, self-serving nature, did what Izzy always did. She immediately, shamelessly looked for the best possible deal to save her own skin. She sang, they said, like a veritable canary in a coal mine, offering prosecutors a veritable treasure trove of salacious, detailed information on Julian's innermost circle, his nefarious methods, his surprising vulnerabilities, all in a desperate, transparent exchange for a significantly reduced sentence. She would still face serious federal charges, of course, her once glittering reputation in tatters, her cynical dreams of becoming the next, richer Mrs. Julian Thorne, now just a bitter, ironic, and widely circulated joke. But she would, most likely, avoid the harshest, longest penalties. A survivor to the very last, albeit a deeply tarnished, universally despised one. Some people, Elara thought with a sigh, never truly learn. Detective Lena Hansen, whose dogged, thankless persistence and unwavering early belief in Elara's incredible story had been so instrumental in bringing the entire monstrous case to the FBI's formidable attention, received a rare, public commendation for her exemplary, courageous police work. She had faced down blatant intimidation from powerful forces, deftly navigated treacherous departmental politics, and willingly, repeatedly risked her own hard-earned career to relentlessly pursue the elusive, dangerous truth. Her unlikely, unofficial partnership with Veronica Ronnie Slate, the intrepid Pulitzer-chasing journalist, became a celebrated, almost legendary example of the extraordinary power of determined, principled individuals working together, against all odds, to fight systemic, deeply entrenched corruption. Ronnie's subsequent series of explosive, meticulously researched articles in the resurrected Nova City Chronicle, unflinchingly detailing the Thorne Legacy Foundation's vast fraudulent activities and the Serpent Coil's insidious, far-reaching global reach, earned her the coveted Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism, and instantly, irrevocably cemented her already considerable reputation as one of the nation's foremost, most fearless investigative reporters. They had both, in their own unique ways, stared unflinchingly into the abyss and had, against all expectations, refused to blink. They were heroes in a city desperately short of them. Miles Corbin, Elara's steadfast, silent guardian and unassuming tech savant, the quiet hero who had made so much of this possible, faded as quietly and unobtrusively back into the anonymous shadows as he had emerged, his critical work now done. He sought no public accolades, no media interviews, no official recognition for his pivotal, life-saving role. His only concern had been, and always would be, Elara's safety and her continued well-being. He remained, as always, her quiet, unseen protector, just an encrypted phone call away. A silent, unwavering promise of steadfast loyalty and unbreakable friendship in a world that had proven itself so profoundly, so devastatingly treacherous. The personal shocker on the Cipher Key about Julian, the one terrible secret Elara had hesitated for so long to reveal, even to the Stoic agent Cole, eventually, inevitably, found its sordid way into the sealed court documents. And from there, just as inevitably, into the salivating, screaming headlines of the global media. It wasn't just about sophisticated financial fraud or complex, audacious money laundering anymore. No, this was far darker, far more personal. It was about a horrifying, sickening pattern of calculated, predatory exploitation, of cynically, cruelly using the pristine, trusted facade of the Thorne Legacy Foundation, not just to illicitly enrich himself and his cronies, but to systematically, remorselessly prey upon the innocent, the desperate, the vulnerable, to manipulate and then casually, cruelly discard those he deemed beneath him, those whose lives he could ruin with a single, careless phone call, in a way that was truly irredeemably depraved. This final, devastating revelation, more than all the financial crimes combined, was what utterly, permanently destroyed his carefully constructed, universally admired public image beyond any hope of repair or future redemption, turning even his most ardent, once loyal former supporters and beneficiaries against him with a vengeance. The Midas King wasn't just corrupt to the core. He was, the world now knew with sickening certainty, a cruel, calculating, empathy-void sociopath, hiding his monstrous nature in plain, glittering sight. The story, of course, doesn't end with a neat, tidy bow, does it? Real life rarely does. The ensuing legal battles would be protracted, complex, and undoubtedly ugly. The fallout from the Serpent Coil's spectacular unraveling continuing to ripple through international financial and political circles for years, if not decades to come. But as Elara Vance, no longer Mrs. Julian Thorne, looked towards the uncertain, yet undeniably hopeful future, a future she had fought so fiercely, so desperately to reclaim from the ashes of her shattered life, there was, at last, a profound, palpable sense of peace, a quiet, deeply rooted belief in the enduring possibility of new beginnings, of second chances. The Cipher Key, that tiny, unassuming repository of so much concentrated darkness and unimaginable pain, paradoxically became an unlikely, potent symbol. A symbol of carefully hidden truths, finally, irrevocably brought blinking into the harsh, cleansing light of day, a powerful testament to the extraordinary, often underestimated courage it takes to expose them, and a stark, unforgettable reminder to the world that even the most powerful, the most untouchable, the most godlike figures among us can, and indeed must, eventually be held accountable for their sins. The narrative, our story, fades out slowly, gently, with Elara some months later, sitting quietly on the sun-dappled wooden porch of a small, charming, and blissfully anonymous cottage, nestled in a place where the rugged ancient mountains meet the vast, restless sea. A place where no one knew her name, her history, her pain, a place where she was simply Ella, the quiet woman with the beautiful, bright-eyed baby. Aurora, her Aurora, gurgles happily in her protective arms, her tiny, perfect fingers reaching with innocent delight for a dancing ray of warm afternoon sunshine. Beside Elara, on a small, weathered wooden table, rests an old, much-loved, leather-bound book of her grandmother's favorite poetry. Tucked carefully within its fragile, time-worn pages, leaving a faint, delicate, almost invisible scar on the paper, is a single, perfectly pressed, stubbornly vibrant purple wildflower from the long-ago sun-drenched fields of Willow Creek. A fragile, yet enduring, private symbol of truth, of astonishing resilience, and of the quiet, unyielding, and ultimately triumphant strength of a woman who had faced down a veritable king, a monster in disguise, and had, against all imaginable odds, irrevocably, undeniably won. The sun is beginning to set, painting the vast evening sky in breathtaking, hopeful hues of rose and gold and deepest violet. And for the very first time in what feels like a lifetime ago, Elara Vance allows herself to simply, deeply, and gratefully breathe. The air is clean, and she is, at last, free. And that, dear viewers, is a truth worth fighting for. If Elara's journey for justice moved you, if her courage inspired you, please, show your support. Hit that like button, share this story of incredible resilience far and wide, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping tales that will keep you on the very edge of your seat. What part of Elara's fight resonated most with you? Let us know in the comments below. We truly want to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay strong and never, ever stop seeking the truth.